Hello, this is Joe Slezak, Director of Marketing and Business Development for H2R CPA. Thank you for joining us today. The Q&A session will occur at the end of the presentation. We have tried to answer as many of the pre-submitted questions as possible during the presentation portion of this webinar. Please use the chat feature to submit your questions to me by selecting Organizer as the recipient of your question. You may submit your question during the program or wait until the end. Please note, since this presentation is being recorded, Commercial Real Estate, the Domino Effect of COVID-19, specific questions which contain identifying information will be filtered to protect our audience. To start, I would like to introduce the panel for today's program. First, we have Leo Hanna, a partner with H2R CPA. Leo is the partner in charge for the firm's accounting and insurance services and has a number of clients in the real estate industry. Next, Dan Adamski is a Senior Managing Director in JLL's Tenant Representation Group. He is responsible for all client requirements in Western Pennsylvania and West Virginia. Finally, David Massaro is the President and Broker of Record for Massaro Properties. He is responsible for leasing and managing Massaro-owned properties, brokerage, development, and property management. I would like to ask that the panel members expand upon their background for about 30 seconds the first time each person is asked to speak. Moving on to the program, I feel that a good starting point would be a recap of the market at the end of 2019 and the beginning of 2020. Dan, starting with you, how would you describe the commercial real estate market before the pandemic in the Pittsburgh region, and how did this compare to the national market, and what were the hot sectors? Again, before you answer that question, please take a moment to expand upon your background.
Hey, David. Not sure what happened to Dan. Maybe you want to kick off the first question?
Okay, sure. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for having me. Good afternoon. So my name is David Massaro. I'm president of Massaro Properties, LLC. Massaro Properties is a leasing, development, property management firm based here in Pittsburgh. We own and lease about 800,000 square feet, mainly office. And we've been in the real estate market here in Pittsburgh since 1976. So that's a little bit of our background. Commercial market before and after the pandemic. Obviously, before the pandemic, I think we had, most of our buildings are located in the Park West corridor. So we had quite a bit of activity in that submarket before the pandemic hit. There seemed to be a lot of commercial mortgage companies looking for space in that market. Also, there was we have some flex buildings, so there was some industrial users looking in that market. So we had a fairly robust market in that Parkway West submarket. When the COVID hit in March of this year, all that activity had ceased. So we have, it really changed kind of very quickly from the beginning of the year till when the pandemic hit in the beginning of March. And it's been slow, but it seems to be picking up a little bit. We're seeing a little bit more activity coming out of this. We're seeing more activity than I anticipated because I thought we would not see anybody looking or touring space during this whole pandemic. So it's a little bit more promising than I thought, but definitely the activity has slowed down considerably due to the COVID-19 pandemic.
Dan, I believe you're on the phone now. Could you take a moment to introduce yourself and provide some initial insight as well?
I can. I apologize. I lost my sound for a second there. So, hi, my name is Dan. I actually began my career in 1994 in commercial real estate, following 8 years in the Marine Corps. So quite a natural progression there. But I'm in my 21st year now with Jones Lang LaSalle. We had a couple hundred people when I started. We're now a Fortune 200 company with over 100,000 employees. I serve as the managing director of the Pittsburgh office, and following last year's acquisition of HFF, we're now the largest commercial real estate firm in Pittsburgh with over 600 employees. For the past 21 years, I've worked exclusively as what's known in our industry as a tenant rep, essentially an advisor to corporations, not landlords such as David. And so I'll give you the flip side or opposite perspective of his in many cases. And many of my clients I advise are the ones you would recognize from Pittsburgh, such as Highmark, Wabtec, ANSYS, Bank of New York Mellon, et cetera. So what have we seen nationally, really and locally? Pre-pandemic, we were having one of the greatest starts to our greatest quarters in recent history. Demand in Pittsburgh from both investors and users was very strong. In fact, right before the pandemic, we had a large lease signed by Facebook in the Strip and 3M in North Point Breeze, and then of course the FNB's new headquarters on the Penn site. So compared to other markets, we had a very strong innovation district. Lots of companies were moving to Pittsburgh or opening offices here because of Carnegie Mellon, because they wanted to chase our millennial talent. And most of these outside companies were coming in specifically for that reason. I think that will continue to be the case. I am very pleasantly surprised, as David noted, that we expected not as much activity as we're seeing right now. So I'm very encouraged, and I'll pause there.
Good. Hey, Dan and David, this is Leo. I guess I'll give a quick to-do about me. I've been a partner for 20 years at H2R. I serve in our real estate and construction area, and I've been here for about 25 years in that area. We do commercial, residential, real estate, and we have a lot of construction experience from clients ranging from about 5 million to 200 million multinational companies. I guess I have a question for the two of you. I know there's issues with the oil and gas industry. Do you see this affecting Pittsburgh in a big way, or not really?
It's David. The oil and gas industry has really suffered here in Pennsylvania. 5, 7, 8 years ago, that was the industry that was gobbling up space in South Point. When that space when you couldn't find space there, it was kind of migrating towards the Parkway West, where we have our buildings. And as you know, the gas prices, dropped significantly, and we've lost a lot of that market. And a lot of that space is being put back on the market. You saw Chevron put their space out, and I'm not exactly sure where, but everybody who seems to be in that market is contracting, and it's obviously putting downward pressure on South Point and the Parkway West market. So I think that's going to continue to be, an issue, Leo. I think some of that space has been absorbed in the market by other folks, but certainly with the gas and oil industry here in Pennsylvania and Pittsburgh proper in general, that was a driving force for a few years out in the South Point and Parkway West. And as of, from what we're seeing, it's really kind of non-existent at this point. There's not many players left that are looking for space, and if they have space, they're trying to sublease or getting out of the market altogether.
Thanks, David.
Mm-hmm.
Dan, would you be able to add some insight to that as well?
Yeah, well, I've worked with quite a few oil and gas companies. In fact, I often joke back in 2009, 2010, almost every phone call I got from outside of Pittsburgh had an 813 area code at the beginning of the number. It was just red hot. It couldn't be more different today. COVID really accelerated what was already a trend that David described, of these companies slashing capital. Wall Street was unhappy with the returns. There was the gas price war. So the drop in demand due to COVID only exacerbated a lot of these issues. So what's the impact on real estate? As David said, South Point's ground zero for these companies. We did move Cabot Oil and Gas headquarters out into the Parkway West in 2012, only because there was no space available in South Point. But I would say of my 15 to 16 oil and gas clients in South Point, 2/3 of them have reached out to me to inquire about subleasing. So not all those spaces are on the market yet, but I do expect there's going to be something akin to a tidal wave of sublease space in South Point. On the positive side, South Point is diversified from where it was 10 years ago. We built the ANSYS headquarters in 2013. They're a leading Fortune 500 software company. And then you also have Mylan, what they're doing with Pfizer, and they continue to grow, as well as Crown Castle. So it's not all about oil and gas solely in South Point anymore.
Another item that was hot before the pandemic, well, at least it was hot or was well talked about, was the opportunity zones and I'm not sure if everyone is familiar with exactly what an opportunity zone is. So before I ask Dan and David about their input, Leo, could you just give a brief rundown of an opportunity zone, just so for the callers that may not know?
Sure, Joe. Big picture, opportunity zones give people the opportunity, pun intended, to invest in economically distressed communities to spur economic development and job creation in those communities. The big tax advantages are you can defer the capital gains that you have invested into these properties until the earlier of the sale of the investment or December 31st, 2026. There's a 5-year holding period that will increase your basis by 10% on that gain. Investments held for over 10 years, the taxpayer can elect to increase the basis of the investment to fair market value on the date it's sold, thus eliminating capital gains on appreciation rising after the 2026 measurement date. Some key dates for people to remember. December 31st, 2021 is the last day to receive a 10% step up on the original gain. December 31st, 2026 is the original deferred gain is recognized. Obviously, April 15th, 2027 is when the taxes would be due. And December 31st, 2028 is the expiration of the designation of qualified opportunity zone funds.
I appreciate that quick rundown, just like I said, for the callers who may or may not be familiar with it or just need a refresher. So with that information, I just wanted to, David, start with you. In your opinion, was the program working to attract investments into these areas? And in the Pittsburgh region, there was a few opportunity zones. Maybe also, could you explain what you thought maybe the hot zones or hot areas were in the greater Pittsburgh region?
Yeah, obviously there's benefits to the investor doing a deal within a qualified opportunity zone. We looked at one opportunity down in right across from Duquesne. It was the old LifeWorks building. It was in an opportunity zone. We had looked at that, but had taken a pass on it. As Leo said, they're areas designed to spur economic development in lower income, distressed areas. So we really didn't, target a particular area. We looked at particular deals to see if they made sense. We never did pull the trigger on any opportunity zone investments. I know for quite a while they were all the rage. There's a lot of folks that were starting funds that were specifically geared toward qualified opportunity zones. But we kind of look at it on based upon the area. We looked at it on a deal by deal basis, and we never pulled the trigger on one. So I'm not super familiar with all the areas, Joe. I just know this one that we looked at down there, the Civic Arena across from Duquesne. I think Duquesne ended up buying the building. Was in a qualified opportunity zone.
So Dan, I remember before the pandemic hit, JLL had a number of pieces that did talk about the opportunity zone. So maybe you could provide some insights into the areas that might have been hot in this region. And I guess the tricky part of the second part of that question is, do you think the pandemic is going to impact the development of those zones?
So I would start by saying I don't think any zone locally would qualify as hot. From a macro level, in our area, the opportunity zones have not taken off as I think most folks expected. And again, my practice is focused more on the user side, whereas David's on the landlord side. So I can speak to what I believe the real issue is, which is demand. No matter how good the program is, a developer such as David or any other firms aren't going to build a product just because of the tax breaks if they know they can't subsequently attract a tenant to that area. So it's maybe perhaps a chicken and an egg issue, but for me, it's not about the economics so much as it is demand. And if these companies are building properties and developing properties to attract tenants, they got to know it's an area where a tenant wants to be. So I think they have not performed perhaps as well as they have in some other markets locally here in Pittsburgh.
Okay. So from the tenant side, and this may be a loaded question, but what do you think could add the demand element? Like, what would the tenants want to see to consider those areas?
So most of our demand, if technology has become the #1 industry in our area for leasing space. And those companies that are coming here, and you can name almost any big tech company that's come to Pittsburgh in the last 5 years. We're talking Facebook, Amazon, even Netflix, Google in a big way. Why did they come here? They came here not because they love our hills and our scenery, but to attract key talent from our universities. Pre-COVID, the trend, without a doubt, was the urbanization of our market. All these companies that we moved, like WabTech and Philips, I moved those companies from the suburbs into town because they wanted to be close to that key talent. So the technology is the #1 industry driver in our area. It doesn't matter how good an opportunity zone package might be economically for the landlord. From a tenant perspective, it's got to hit those key button issues these companies are looking for. Google, if they're trying to recruit, they know they're trying to recruit that younger demographic that's coming out of Carnegie Mellon. They prefer a more urbanized environment. And that's, again, speaking from the tenant side, that's their key driver.
Joe, can I add to the opportunity
Definitely.
question? So, they're designed to get developers to go into, like you said, economically distressed areas. So pre-COVID, it was, an opportunity for somebody to go in and, say, a Braddock area and do a development in Braddock. Fast forward with the pandemic, all developments are being impacted, I think, because of what we're going through right now and the uncertainty of what the future looks like. So if you stack that on top of qualified opportunity zones, they probably fall farther down than they may have were in the food chain because of location and where they might be versus other developments. I think developers are going to be very picky about where they decide to develop in the future, given the uncertainty and what's going on in the market right now. And I think qualified opportunity zones are going to suffer because of that.
So I guess moving on to the next part, I think there's a lot of elements of we're in this together, and we have the banks, we have the landowners, the tenants, and it's been a trying time, to say the least, for the last few months. And so to start off, I'm actually going to ask Leo, because Leo, I know we have a number of real estate clients that have been working with the banks as far as getting some deferments and things of that nature. Can you maybe provide some insight what you're seeing from the banks and how they're helping real estate owners?
Sure, Joe. Most banks are letting clients defer principal and interest payments for at least 3 months. The principal piece, most banks are adding on to the end of the loan piece, so you don't have to pay that back. But the interest piece, they're looking to pay back usually within 12 months or less. So it's kind of helping companies' cash flow by not having to pay the principal and interest piece during these hard times when they may not be collecting enough rents.
And is there any insight as far as the length of time they're deferring?
Well, they're deferring the principal till the end of the actual when the principal's due. So if it's a balloon in 2026, if you defer 3 months, they're adding it on to the balloon. So, but the interest piece, they want you to pay over, obviously, 12 months. That's what I'm seeing.
I guess before I dive into the second part of that question, David, are you seeing something similar with your properties in particular?
Yes, or exactly what Leo said. Every one of our banks that we have loans with has worked with us during this pandemic. Starting, they have either deferred both principal and interest for a 90-day period. In some cases, they just deferred principal. But every one of the banks, and they had to jump through a bunch of hoops because, they're governed by the FDIC and, the loan would have been out of compliance. So they really worked, at least in our case, really well with us and quickly to try to help alleviate some of this pain that they knew we were going to see from the tenants in our buildings. So we went from, we had several CMBS loans, which are collateralized loans through large Wall Street firms. we got out of all those loans and went to local banks because, I don't know what those type of loans or what the CMBS market did for their clients, but I know the banks that we had all of our properties, our mortgages with, worked with us right away and did exactly what Leo said. They deferred the principal and interest in most cases for 90 days. And they even said, if this continues, come back to us and we'll consider another 90 days of deferral for you. And most of them have done what Leo said, they're tacking on the principal. In most of our cases, they're tacking on the principal and interest to the balloon payment when our term expires on that loan. So they've been very, very, very good to work with locally here for us at least.
And Joe, to add on to what David just said, I have some clients that also are getting an additional 90 days now from 2 banks in Pittsburgh. So that's basically they're getting 180 days of principal deferral. So banks are really trying to help get through this.
And Dan, from the tenant side, I'm not sure if your clients would pull you into this mix or not, but are you helping any of your clients as far as interacting with the commercial real estate landowners as far as working out agreements to possibly defer their rental payments?
Yes, certainly. In fact, the first 4 weeks of the pandemic, I only semi-joked that I was probably spending 10 to 12 hours a day on the phone, either with my clients who were seeking rent relief or with, in turn with the landlords requesting it. A lot of the solutions were similar to what you just heard. Some of the landlords provided several months of free rent or several months of half rent, which they amortized either over the remaining lease term or they added on to the end. We kind of call that a pretend and extend because we were going to pretend everything was going to be all right and extend the lease. Some of the other landlords in the market, I thought creatively or proactively reached out to their tenants even before I was involved and tried getting them, the ones that felt good about their long-term viability they reached out on their own initiative to offer their tenants free rent or if they would add 2 years of term of their lease, for example, or 3 years. So we've seen a wide variety of solutions to this. I would say that fortunately by mid-April, those calls almost entirely dropped off as people started to see light at the end of the tunnel, and the discussion really switched from rent relief to reentry. So I do think it's a good thing because the previous conversation about rent relief wasn't good for anybody. The latter discussion about reentry is good for everyone because it means we're getting back to business.
And this is Leo. To add on to what Dan said, I had a couple of clients either offer deferral or a discount so that they can help their own cash flow. So if they were paying rent for a month, they would give them a 5% discount off the rental that continued going forward for 3 months.
And that's the benefit of having a local bank like David mentioned, because a CMBS lender, big, complicated, baseless entity, and you don't even know where they are sometimes, could never give the landlords that kind of flexibility, whereas the local banks, to their credit, are nimble like that.
And I'll add that we had a rush of tenants when this first hit in March saying, we need rent relief, we can't pay our rents, and of course we said, sure, we'll work with you, and the banks got involved and helped us out. But when we put all these agreements together, our tenants saying, deferring rent till the end of the year or tacking on to the end, depending on, what we felt was best for us and them. And then what we saw was when they released the PPP money is everybody wanted to pay the rent because that's part of the PPP program. So it turned out that everybody didn't need as much help as they thought they needed as a tenant of ours. They said, they got this PPP money and we saw people paying that money out. So it wasn't, in the beginning we thought it was going to be a huge financial impact to us as a landlord. It turns out it wasn't that big of a financial impact because of the PPP stimulus package. But, that goes to the end of the year. So that just, which is good. But beyond that, that's where you kind of not sure what the landscape's going to look like after people burn through this PPP money and they try to get back into their business cycle.
Thanks, David. Yeah, and that's a good point. I know a number of our clients obviously have worked through the process and started to receive their PPP loans and part of it definitely can be used for rent. So that makes sense from the dynamics of the banks actually processing those loans and getting the money into the business's hands. So with that, as you know, we're currently in the green phase, although we did just hear today that the governor is closing down bars and cases are on the rise. So for now, we're in the green phase, and hopefully that stays the course. But with the green phase, you know, there's a lot of concerns on the mitigation efforts to make sure the employees that are returning back to the offices are safe. And David, I guess starting with you, would you mind sharing what type of, if any, mitigation requests you're receiving and maybe what you're doing to help alleviate your tenants' concerns as well?
You mean regarding the spread of COVID?
Yes, I didn't know if you were receiving requests for extra cleaning, if there was a request to add in special HVAC system.
Yeah. So yes, we have worked hard to come up with a, you know, we'll call it a back to work policy for our tenants. A lot of them are concerned about, you know, reopening and, you know, cleaning and sanitization of the building. So what we did is we're propping open all of our doors, as many doors we can in the building, so people don't have to touch handles, come in and out. We're encouraging people to take the stairs instead of elevators. We have hand sanitizers at all of our lobby common areas on all the floors. We are requiring masks when you enter the building. We have hired a cleaning company to do a twice-a-day cleaning in all those touch points, bathrooms, entrance doors, elevator buttons, you know, vending machines, to have them cleaned twice a day. And then, so we're putting those precautions in place when people come into the building. When they get into their suites, it's really up to them to decide if they want to do, you know, take temperatures, have their employees wear masks at that point. And we just got an email today from one of our tenants who's back at work. Their employee tested positive for COVID. So we just found out today over the weekend he tested. So we've got to alert everybody, let them know what is going on, you know, and have, you know, our cleaning company, they're kind of our front line right now against this disease, you know, and helping us keep it clean and sanitized for the people entering our building. So there's a lot of precautions that, you know, me and I'm sure many other tenants have put in place to have tenants come back to your building and try to reduce the spread of the COVID virus.
Thanks, David. And so with that, Leo, you know, as a partner with H2R CPA, obviously a business owner yourself as well, you know, you have to relay this message to the employees that it's safe to return.
Well, I think the big thing is technology. We're not really requiring people to come back if they're not comfortable. We'd like for people to come in once a week, whether it be 2 in the morning if they're not comfortable to look at for mail, etc. But we're set up so that you can really work from home. And I think that's the important piece of this right now. Also, when you're in the office, obviously we're requiring masks, and we have the signs posted, and we have the same stuff that David had mentioned. So I think that's important from that perspective to make sure that people think that they're safe.
And Dan, kind of swinging back to you. So we don't know how long this is going to last, but the real estate industry is probably going to be, best guess, addressing these concerns for the next 12 to 18 months. And that's not based on any fact, just on reading what they say in regard to vaccines. But as people look at space moving forward, I would imagine that this becomes part of their tenant agreement. So how do real estate owners use this to help attract tenants? And are there going to be additions to the leases that actually specifically address these issues moving forward, in your opinion?
Starting with the latter question first, yes, the leases are going to change significantly going forward. There's if you have a big office lease, typically there's 60 to over 100 pages, and a lot of that language sometimes almost was glossed over. The civil riots, the pandemic language that you really never thought was going to come into effect, and it has in the last few months. And so I think the legal industry is going to come out of the pandemic with a very strong book of business, because we are crossing we're crossing a threshold here that no one really anticipated. And there's a lot of gray areas. I've had clients who, for example, were supposed to move into a new space and couldn't, because they couldn't get it, because the mayor shut down, this is downtown, he shut down the permitting office the day they were supposed to get their final occupancy permit. So now this company was technically on the hook to pay rent at 1 Oxford Center and also 11 Stanwyck Street. Nobody knows what the answer is. The courts are gonna decide, I guess. But so yes, leases I think are going to spend leases just only seem to get longer. 25 years ago leases were 4 pages, now they're 100. So certainly they're going to get longer because of this. I do think the new selling points for real estate are going to change. Right now, for the companies that are transacting and making decisions, and I will say that over 90% of our activity is ground to a halt, because companies are, they're fear-based right now. Most of my user clients don't want to make a decision right now if they don't have to, because they're worried about a second wave or a vaccine, or uncertainty breeds lack of action, and that's where we're at. But looking forward beyond that, I think the newer buildings, they're going to really sell their technology, as Leo said. The Penn site, for example, FNB's new headquarters, they redesigned it almost at the outset of COVID to ensure you could park your car in the building and get into your office without ever touching anything. They're also going to have multiple lighting in the ceiling at night to sanitize the space, and they're going to have significantly beefed up HVAC systems. All this costs money, but if companies are truly mostly focused on safety, they're going to gravitate towards these newer buildings, and it's going to widen what was already a widening gap between our Class B type properties and our trophy buildings. On the converse side, I think what will help buildings, David's portfolio is very strong in the Parkway West. Where I think that's going to be beneficial is public transportation is the weak link right now in returning folks to the office. I work downtown. I've been back at work for a few weeks, and it's a ghost town down here. And most of my employees, we have 600 employees. Most of my employees that don't want to come back to work is because they don't want to get on a bus or be too close to someone else on public transportation. So the suburban options are getting a lot more attention with our active requirements, and I expect that to continue. And then finally, amenities. Health and wellness amenities, again, are going to be a big point. Pre-COVID, all these new buildings you saw going up in the Strip District and downtown, the renovations, were really all around creating a better tenant experience, such as fitness centers, conference centers, things like that, coffee lounges. Well, at the flip of a light switch, suddenly employees don't want to be in those group environments. I have no doubt that pendulum will swing back the other way. But as of right now, those amenities that were so critical just 4 months ago now look like liabilities.
Kind of getting into the domino effect, and Dan, you did touch upon the selling points, and so I'm actually going to skip to that question on this slide. David, maybe you haven't thought that far ahead yet, but are you starting to map out using the changes you've made in regard to safety as a selling point for your properties?
Yes. Yeah, we have to, we're in a new world right now, and you have to be prepared to discuss your safety plan for your existing tenants and tenants who are thinking about coming into your buildings. I will disagree with Dan on the widening between the A and B buildings. I think everybody can't afford an A building, so there's still going to be this B market, that's basically where our buildings are, that is more affordable for tenants than the Class A or trophy assets that Dan's talking about. And I will say, yes, going forward, we are talking, when we're doing tours, we're talking about the mitigation efforts we're taking as a landlord to keep the buildings clean and sanitized. So yeah, I think it's important. It's going to change, the way, you sell real estate, and we have to, because that's top of mind for everybody right now. And it's added cost for us. We've got to have someone in there sanitizing twice a day now. You talk about airflow, the filtration system. There's HEPA filters that, that filtrate more particles than just regular filters, but they cost more. So there's an increased cost to building owners to deal with this mitigation effort, but it's something you have to do. Otherwise, you're going to be behind the curve.
And David, just keeping it with you for a moment, you briefly touched upon maybe there was concerns initially from the rental income, which somewhat alleviated with the PPP loans being distributed. What's your opinion on the long-term market value of commercial real estate?
That's a good question, Joe. I don't think anybody really knows right now. I don't think anybody really knows what the future of real estate looks like. I mean, if you look at the retail market is in shatters right now. There's Chapter 11. I think this COVID has just pushed those people who were kind of on the cusp of going bankrupt, pushed them bankrupt. You know, it's just accelerated their bankruptcy. So that's on the cusp. You have hospitality. You know, we had some hospitality in our portfolio. We got out of it about a year or two ago, but that whole industry has been decimated. You know, we're in the office market. So what keeps me up at night is sitting there thinking about when these tenants when their leases come up for renewal, are they going to need as much space as they have right now? I think what we've all found out during this pandemic is you can work remotely pretty well. It's, you know, even as a construction company on our construction side, we would have never been remote except for the pandemic. We had to go remote, and we found out that our business operates pretty well remotely. People can still, with technology today, still stay in touch. And, you know, and I'm sure that's what tenants are looking at is, you know, do I need as much real estate, as much space as I have right now? And my, you know, I'm kind of a half glass, half empty as opposed to half full. I think people are going to say, I don't need that much. I can have people work from home and I can take less space. And if you think about, you know, from a, you know, what tenants spend their most money on, first is employees and second is rent. You know, and if you can reduce that rent and get the same amount of work done out of your people, I think it's going to be a strong consideration for tenants when their leases do expire. I've heard the other side where people said, well, maybe they need to space out more with this, you know, social distancing. I don't see that happening. I see people saying we're going to take less space and have more people work from home and not, you know, come to the office. So I don't know what the future looks like. I'm concerned about what it's going to look like in the future. I really am about commercial real estate because I think it's going to, you know, the footprint of what people need is going to shrink. But, you know, I'm kind of taking a wait and see because I think it's going to be, you know, it's going to be 12 months before you figure out, at least 12 months, 9 to 12 months on what this really is going to, the impact it's going to have on the overall, not only the real estate market, but the overall general economy of Allegheny County, Pennsylvania, and the country.
Thanks, Dave. Hey, I just want to jump in from a finance perspective on valuation concerns. I know some of my clients were looking to refi because they had some tenant improvements and leasing commissions to get out of the building, and the banks are really looking hard at valuation. Appraisals are slow right now. So from a refi perspective, it's been kind of tough. That and the bankers I'm talking to think that the interest rate environment is going to go up tremendously with the refi. So there's a lot of things to consider from a finance perspective with valuations because of what David said. I think in the future, people are going to downsize, and that obviously affects valuation when you have less rental space.
And tying into that, we actually did get a question via our chat. Leo, and you touched upon the operations side already a little bit in the prior question as far as moving to technology, but subleases, you know, I'm sure there's going to be an element of, as a tenant, do I need as much space as I did prior? Maybe you can add some insights from a business perspective of what you're seeing on the sublease side.
Sure. Let's step back. So I think there's two things that we're looking at as a business. Pre-COVID, we were looking at taking more space in our building in Greentree. Now the COVID has hit and we've been able to see what people can do from home. We're not looking to take more space. We're looking to maybe hotel a little bit, so that, you know, even though we're outgrowing our space, we're going to try not to, because of what David said, rentals are second largest expense. The second piece of it is obviously we are looking to sublease. We lease some space up in Beaver that we feel that we could sublease. So we've already sublet. two offices to a law firm, and now we're looking to sublease 2 more to the Chamber of Commerce up there. So we are seeing that, we can make some money because we don't need as much space in our Beaver office. So we're trying to gauge from a business perspective what makes the most sense between hoteling and maybe subleasing at this point.
And Dan, from your how does it help you from the tenant representation side as far as getting the best space for your clients?
Well, depends whether they're acquiring or trying to dispose of space. Like Leo said, from a subleasing perspective, a lot of my clients are reassessing their needs. They feel like they have excess space, they want to give it up. The problem is going to be that almost every company is examining that, and when there's a glut of space, demand becomes the issue. But from a user perspective, it creates options. Frankly, it's going to put downward pressure on the rental rates in the market, particularly downtown. Downtown had a number of black clouds on the horizon, just given some major institutions like Bank of New York Mellon and other one. UPMC last week put 100,000 square feet on the sublease market. So from I represent corporations, not landlords. So from my side, it creates tremendous leverage for me because oftentimes, in every instance in Pittsburgh, a sublease is priced below market. So it does create more options, and it makes life more difficult for landlords that have to compete on a direct basis with these companies that, like Leo said, you're not really making money. They're just trying to mitigate expenses. And so they're willing to take a hit that a profit-driven, ROI-based landlord can't make.
And interesting. And David, from a landlord side, do you have any concerns with the increase of subleases potentially?
Yeah, just because of what Dan said. They get more leverage when they're negotiating with landlords. There's more leverage. It's not good to have more space on the market, whether it's vacant or sublease space. It makes a landlord, do things that he might normally do to get that tenant in his building, because he knows there's so much space out there. So, yeah, it's no good for landlords to have any vacancy or sublease space in the market. But that's, it's not realistic. There's always going to be that. But, as more of these tenants, start downsizing and start subleasing space, that's just more space you've got to compete with in the market. So, yeah, it's not a good thing for the market with, vacancy and sublease space, more of it coming on the market.
So with that, Dan, I do know there was a number of mixed use elements, and I think you touched upon this briefly as far as the fitness centers and everything that was being used to attract tenants. In your opinion, do you think the tenants are going to be as concerned about the mixed use space going forward with the retail on the bottom? Or are we looking at maybe a fundamental shift going forward?
Well, I would say it depends on your time horizon, and I'm asked this question a lot. What I always say is the only thing I can guarantee you is whatever prediction I make will be wrong. And anyone that thinks they know anyone that thinks they know what it's going to be is you probably shouldn't listen to them. But things are going to change. I just don't think we can predict how. I've been through the tech boom, 9/11, the Great Recession, and after each one of those incidents, there was very dramatic, sweeping statements being made about the death of the commercial real estate industry in each case. And I read recently, post 9/11, no one was going to go into high rises anymore. And I'd ask if anyone knows since 9/11, how many, of the 15 tallest buildings in the world, how many were built since then? And the answer is all 15, which for several years after 9/11, my clients wouldn't let me show them anything above the 10th floor in some buildings. And yet since then, we've kind of forgotten about that. So whether or not the tenant demand is going to change as a result, I think depends on whether there's a vaccine and how resilient we are. Or conversely, a lot of our grandparents after the Great Depression and the bank failures never put their money in a bank again. They kept it under a mattress. So I don't know how deep of an impact this is going to have on our psyche that folks that are going to make lasting, sweeping decisions. I think that's just going to have to watch and see how it unfolds. But like David said at the beginning of the call, things are bouncing back. I'm an optimistic guy, and they've actually bounced back better than even I expected so far. So I hope that continues. That's
great. Yeah, the bounce back, hearing that news is always good. And And David, I know in our preparation call, we were talking about the hotel industry, and you referenced that you actually did not move forward with a deal, which, due to the timing, benefited you, obviously, because of the situation that's currently unfolding. But with that, no one knows what occupancy rates are going to be and if it's going to rebound. But based on the research that you did initially for exploring the hotel deal that you ultimately did not move forward with, is that something that you would consider in the future? And if so, what time frame would you even consider another hotel deal?
And this is my opinion. I think Pittsburgh's over hoteled right now. There's too many hotel rooms and not enough people to fill them. But if you look at the one deal we were in and we got out of, it was in the Oakland market. Pitt has now leased a big block of rooms down there. So, these where one door closes, another door opens. So it's funny how these things, like the hospitality industry, at least in one example, the hospitality industry was nobody's traveling, so the rooms weren't getting filled, but the university has to, provide singles for their students coming back. So they have now leased a large block of rooms from the hotel that we were in prior to exiting that. So it's just it's amazing what the things that you think are happen the way they happen, like the hospitality industry. But a pure hospitality play, in my opinion, from an investment standpoint, I wouldn't do here anywhere in the near future. I think the hospitality industry is reeling right now because of this pandemic and people aren't traveling. So I would not be apt to look at any hotel acquisitions. We're not a big hotel developer player. We've done 2 of them. But I think it's a very risky market right now to invest your money in.
And Leo, and we did receive some additional questions before we move on to the Q&A session. What advice would you offer to our real estate clients, just general business advice, as they're navigating this time, or even our tenants or our business companies?
So from real estate, over the years, the 2 most important things for me in the real estate industry are location and occupancy. So if you're looking to purchase real estate, I think you have to look real hard at the location and the pricing. I mean, quite honestly, now might be the time to buy if valuation is down and you're looking for a long-term play. So that's kind of how I would look at it, from look at the location if you're looking to purchase. From an occupancy perspective, I mean, that's all what the valuation is all about. If you have good tenants, I think, and they're good paying, I think you do what you can to keep them, as long as it's a profitable deal. It might not be as profitable in the past, but I think you got to look at keeping your good tenants.
And like I said, we did receive some questions already via the chat. And the first question, Dan, I'm going to send to you because you touched upon it, but the rise of share space, how do you see those types of properties moving forward from a use space as far as tenants moving in?
Yeah, so as we call it, co-working, it was all the rage for the last several years, particularly a company you might have heard of called WeWork. And, I'm 52. A lot of people make fun of me. I'm too old to understand co-work. I just don't get the draw to sitting in a wide open area with a laptop next to a bunch of people you don't know. But nonetheless, that it was quite in New York City, for example, for the past 2 years, almost the entire absorption in that market was due to co-working groups leasing space. My colleagues who run the New York office right now are in panic mode because none of those spaces are leasing. Nobody wants to go into a co-working environment right now. So I can't tell you what the answer is, but I can tell you that is, I would not put my own money into a co-working operation right now. We were working with several groups in Pittsburgh, national players that were circling our market, and we were touring them to open up co-working operations. They have all since, 100% of them, canceled their desire to open up a new operation. However, there is an opportunity for them, and where I think you're going to see the activity, the downtown co-working groups are you're not going to see any more new ones. In fact, you're going to see a few close that I'm aware of. In the suburbs is where I think you could see some co-working, because a lot of these, I mentioned earlier, transportation is the weak link in the reentry process we as a society are going through. Having co-working space available in the suburbs could give some of those employees of yours who don't want to come into the office via public transportation another option. So we're working with a few companies right now that are either considering leasing co-working space in the suburbs or opening their own suburban hub to address that concern.
Hey, Dan, this is Leo. I'm just curious because I'm glad we moved out of the city. Do you see that a lot of companies moving out of the city in the future, or will they stay in the city?
So that goes back to my earlier comment, whether or not we maintain that Great Depression mentality that we're going to be affected by this the rest of our lives in a negative way, in which case I think you're going to see the suburbs do well, which is great for David. But right up until March 15th of this year, we just put out a white paper about the urbanization occurring in this area. I'm banned, I think, from Westmoreland County because I've moved Westinghouse and Phillips Respironics and Wabtec's headquarters all on of that submarket because they all wanted to be closer to key talent, and that was just a trend nationally, not just Pittsburgh. With COVID, none of my clients are rushing to be downtown right now, and again, my big ones that are based downtown are inquiring about satellite offices in the suburbs.
Thank you.
And David, another question received, and I'm just going to start with you, but anyone can add their piece. What type of capitalization rates are you seeing in the commercial real estate market during the COVID-19 crisis?
That's a good question. I mean, for the suburban office, the suburban office was somewhere probably an 8.5 cap rate pre-COVID. What it is prior or after COVID, I'm not sure. But, there was a little softening on the cap rates for those type of suburban offices. But, cap rates for, our product were typically in the 8 to 8.5% cap rate for suburban office buildings.
I would say that the key question there is what asset class, because, for example, I have retail brokers, I have industrial brokers, office brokers. All my retail brokers want to become industrial guys. So if you're in the last mile industry, industrial, or you have a warehouse space, anything related to e-commerce right now is red hot. Conversely, anything related to retail and hospitality are ice cold. The cap rates are reflecting that. Amazon recently leased a 1 million square foot warehouse out in our Parkway West corridor. Cap rates for those kind of deals, it's almost like a barbell effect. The differential on both ends, it's dramatically lower for those kind of assets or buildings are in the hot sectors like e-commerce, and the others, office, retail, are suffering for now.
Right, and I think the location too. You got the suburban versus the CBD type of markets. You got multifamily that was very hot, and who knows what that's going to look like with around here in the country. So the cap rate depends on the location and the type of product, I think, and just going off of what we've seen in the product we mainly do out in the Parkway West suburban offices, they're about 8 to 8.5 prior to. After, again, I don't know how you would underwrite something now. I mean, it'd be hard to underwrite something and say, what it's worth at this point, because nobody knows what the future is going to look like.
Is it safe to say that go ahead, David.
I would say I do know a friend of mine, he had a building under agreement prior to COVID, and COVID hit, and he said they closed on the property, but he got a significant discount on the purchase price. And he used the uncertainty with COVID to drive down that purchase price, and he got a significant discount on it. So it's hard to value anything right now and figure out what the long-term economics is going to be for almost any type of product right now, except that what Dan's saying is that, that industrial Amazon type warehouse, everything else is really, I think, going to be uncertain right now, and what kind of value it's going to attract now and into the future, so it's really tough to say.
Is it safe to say that in Pittsburgh, the Strip area and East Pittsburgh are the hottest areas because of the STEM employees, and that's where they want to be? Do you think that's the highest valuations?
Without a question, yeah.
Mhm.
Tech industry is our number one driver. First 20 years of my career, I never represented a client who signed a lease with a rental rate that began with a 3. We're doing deals in Oakland right now that start with a 5, even despite everything going on right now. Those kind of companies, the tech companies are doing very well, and one of them we're working with is a very well-known company, and they're willing to pay that price because they want the Carnegie Mellon students to be able to walk to their office when they're not in class.
So one final question before we wrap up. Dan, I'm going to send this to you because I feel like it best fits your wheelhouse. A lot of people pick their office space to help build their culture, and their culture is built around, as far as it's open, it's closed, the amenities and things of that nature. With the pandemic, is culture as big of an issue going forward with the office space? And how do you think that might change?
Yeah, to quote one of my favorite managerial experts, Peter Drucker, he always said, culture eats strategy for lunch, and that's just not going to change. And so I think the shine hasn't come off the honeymoon yet from working from home. It is easy to work from home. Technology facilitates it, but we're only doing it for 3 months right now, 4 months, and almost everybody on those work calls with you. Over time, as you try to onboard new employees, if you expect to recruit and retain great employees, they're coming to you because of your culture, and you can't facilitate a corporate culture via Zoom calls. You can sustain your business, you can work from home, so the space use is going to change. Any kind of work you can do with your head down, you can do that from home. But the real value the companies add, their core value comes from collaboration, and you have to do that in the office. So IBM and Yahoo several years ago both tried sending 100% of their workforce home, and after about 2 years, in both instances, they watched their competitors, Google, Microsoft, Apple, leap ahead of them because of their corporate culture. And I think the same thing's going to happen here. The pendulum's going to swing too far one way, and everyone's going to think we can send 100% of our workforce to work from home. And over a year or two, they're going to find out it didn't work out the way they thought it would, and the pendulum will come back. It might not ever come back to where it was before, but it will certainly swing back.
And I would add, in a profession like mine, CPA business, assuming technical expertise, we're all about relationships, right? So how do you develop relationships in Zoom meetings and just working from home? I may be old in saying this, but I like to go to my clients. I like to have discussions with them. I like to get to know them. And you really can't do that in this COVID day and age. We did do a lot of our audits, technology from remote, but I don't particularly like that thought process.
With that, we are a few minutes behind our allotted time. And so I'm going to wrap up, and we also went through the questions that came in through the chat. I'd like to thank Leo, David, Dan, once again, for adding their insight into the commercial real estate industry for the attendees of this phone call. Very insightful. I think the one thing we know is that we don't know what's going to happen next as everything continues to unfold in a new manner. As we work our way through the different phases, even locally, being in the green phase, yet also managing the increase of cases and potentially maybe moving back to the yellow phase. Again, I haven't heard that officially. It's just you have to wonder if that's going to occur. I don't think any of us knows where this is going to end in the next 6 months. Hopefully, beyond 6 months, there's a vaccine and all this is just a footnote in history books, and we can all move forward to business as we were used to doing it prior to COVID-19. With that, please stay safe during these trying times. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to reach out to myself, Joe Slezak, Leo, David, or Dan. Their information is in the PowerPoint slides, which I will be sending to everyone via email following this call. I'm sure we're all willing to be here as a resource for you. And with that, thank you once again for attending, and have a great day.